the original EVERSPACE arrived as the debut title from Rockfish Games, it instantly became one of the most beautiful space games around. With its scattered asteroid belts, dilapidated space stations, and vibrant nebulas, it made the universe anything but beige.
Here we are. His whiz, fizzbit, crinny, dull.
It also included a photo mode that, while technically got an action freeze and being fairly basic even by 2017 standards, enabled players to capture the magnificent space vistas and exciting dogfights that the game had to offer. The full sequel was always going to be great news for any virtual photographers with an eye for the interstellar then, and seeing as Rockfish have changed the formula a bit for EVERSPACE 2, things could be even more interesting this time.
Hell, yes, it's gonna end in bloodshed again.
Gone is the roguelike loop of procedural levels with incremental yet linear progress, and in its place is a narrative-driven looter-shooter set in a fully open world, well, open star systems really, all filled with over 100 handcrafted locations. The gameplay primarily features the same fast-paced combat, with there being a fight to be had everywhere you go to some degree, though there's also a decent helping of environmental puzzles, mining, crafting, and even races to be had along the way. The story alone is claimed to last you at least 30 hours, though you should expect to dip into the other 60 plus hours worth of side quests and optional content just to avoid being underleveled, especially if you hope to take on the higher level endgame challenges. It all adds up to a greater RPG feel this time. The huge number of ship upgrades, weapons and perks open up many different tactics, while gaining reputation with factions and bolstering your list of companions will definitely benefit you in the battlefield. Expect no shortage of stunning space battles that will make you want to reach for the photo mod then, and it is actually called photo mod this time, but the big question is whether the photography tools have been given any upgrades worthy of the game's own loftier aspirations.
Right, Hive. Let's hope your new wavelength does the trick.
The short answer to that is technically yes, but it is still a basic implementation. Added options for field of view, aperture and exposure boost the feature set, it just doesn't really shake off the feel of being a debug camera that's made accessible to the player. That is by no means a bad thing in principle, by the way, especially given the virtually infinite range of camera movement that comes with it as a result. Nothing remains out of reach, as you are free to roam the entire playable area, but this is a photo mod that's unfortunately saddled with awkward controls that include some of the worst button assignments I can think of.
Not expected.
Essentially, when entering the photo mode, the in-game ship controls are transferred to the camera. So when using the default Scheme A setup, the left stick thrust controls translate to lateral truck and dolly, right stick handles complete 360 degree pan and tilt, and the L1 and L2 hover becomes vertical camera craning. But the issues arise with the fact that everything else involves holding a combination of buttons despite there being some obvious unmapped ones available. Camera roll, for example, is performed by holding down R3 while continuing to use the right stick. The very useful camera acceleration is found in the same way with L3 in the left stick, and all of the settings along with the UI and the thirds grid to aid composition require you to hold R2 constantly. I mean, why not just implement a toggle to show and hide the settings user interface? Maybe use the ideally suited D-pad to switch between and adjust them. Instead, the three available settings are cycled by pressing square, while holding R2 remember, and adjusted using R1 and the now repurposed L1, again, while still holding R2. Maybe things make more sense when using a mouse and keyboard, but on a controller, the button choices are just not very user friendly.
Even a loser deserves a good laser.
What was that?
With that fairly major complaint out of the way then, let's focus on some of the positives again. The advantage of having complete camera freedom really cannot be overstated when it comes to finding shots. While the field of view setting offers a similarly free adjustment that goes from extreme wide angles with plenty of stretch distortion to a huge telephoto zoom that narrows the view, brings subjects closer and compresses the scene. Exposure also has a healthy range that can easily darken the shot or crank up the brightness to make light sources overpowering, and the depth of field is handled in a simple but effective way. Pressing X, along with R2 of course, will focus the camera on whatever the centre reticle is aimed at, and aperture adjustments then vary the amount of defocus blur that is applied to both the foreground and the background. It even responds to the field of view setting with a shallower depth of field resulting in longer zoom lengths for a pretty pleasing effect with an authentic optical look. Beyond that, there is really not much more to speak about, and this remains a photo mode with a fairly modest feature set. In fact, it actually loses one feature from its predecessor with the optional EVERSPACE logo no longer available. It can still be used to good effect though, and once you get the hang of those inputs, you'll be able to cruise around the galaxy and take advantage of some stellar subject matter, pardon the pun. EVERSPACE 2 manages to recapture the visual appeal of the original, and remains one of the prettiest corners of virtual space that you can find. As an art style, it's perhaps comparable to Chorus, more intricate than No Man's Sky, and more vibrant than the realistic black depths of Elite Dangerous. Each of the 6 star systems have their own stylistic colour scheme, and are all filled with arresting backdrops, intriguing bases, and fragments of debris everywhere you go. With the freedom to explore inside some structures, enter the atmosphere of certain planets, and even go underground, there's plenty of places to take that virtual camera. You never do leave your ship though, so it's just as well that there are 9 different classes available to the player, each with multiple tiers, upgrades and cosmetic modifications available. Add to that the 11 different factions with their own craft that range from small scouts and fighters to massive cruisers, and that's quite a bit of variety for the inevitable combat shots. I say inevitable not just because the game leans heavily on combat encounters, but because they're great to shoot, in a photographic sense that is. Weapons light up the skies with blasts of colour, bolts of electricity and homing clusters that play off against the ship engine trails to add a nice sense of dynamism. Plus, when something big does go down, it does so in a satisfying cloud of burning smoke and dust. The reduced penalty for death that comes with the change in the game style does take away some of the sense of danger, but that also means that you're now not going to lose that perfect photo location when an unexpected Okar patrol or outlaw ambush sends you crashing back to the beginning.
We are surrounded by hostiles and taking fire. Request immediate assistance.
In fact, with that unlimited camera range, it's even possible to keep a safe distance and photograph ongoing conflicts from afar should you really want to. Just don't expect to stay safe for long. EVERSPACE 2 stacks up as a fine space-themed looter shooter then, and the switch to an open-world RPG works well for in-game photographers. The added freedom to roam, return to the beautifully crafted locations, or seek out another dogfight makes it easy to take advantage of some great subject matter. Virtually infinite camera range also helps here, but an otherwise limited feature set and some awkward control choices mean that getting the best out of the excellent art style is not quite as fun as it might have been.